In this video, we'll be discussing Chapter 12, GDP and Growth. We'll be talking about Section 1 and talking about how the economy is healthy. In Section 1, we'll be focusing on GDP, which is known as Gross Domestic Product. What does the GDP show about the nation's economy? We are going to discover and figure out how GDP is calculated, look at different approaches, look at parts of it that are not included in GDP, and also look about something called aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Now, GDP is that massive number that shows how the economy is growing or not growing or staying the same. The department that is responsible for this is Department of Commerce, and in that department they have a sub-agency who is responsible for the national income accounting. So what that means is they're the ones responsible to record all the different statistics that are out there when it comes to the economy and being able to calculate the number. So here's the definition of GDP. Dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders in a given year. So let's break that down. First, dollar value. This means total cash value. So for instance, movie tickets. What is the total cash value at the end of the year of all the collected cash value from movie tickets? Maybe it is memberships to different places. Maybe it is types of different foods, grocery stores, retail, clothing, shoes. Whatever it is, it's a collection of all this dollar value to get this total amount of value. The next part is final goods and services. This means that the good that is being purchased is in its final state. So for instance, if you were to build a computer and you're buying different elements of the computer, those elements that you're putting together for a computer, that if you were to sell the computer, would not be considered part of GDP. So when you go to a store like Best Buy and you purchase a computer, that is a final good or service. But at the manufacturing site where they're putting all the elements inside the computer, those elements are not included because they're not a final good or service. Same thing when it comes to a vehicle or a lawnmower. All those different parts that have been used to assemble those products would not be considered part of GDP, only the final good. So when you buy that car, it is in a final good state. It is part of GDP. Produced within a country's border. Produced within a country's border. So within the U.S., we had different car companies. Toyota, which is not an American-based company, which is actually based in Japan, has plants in the United States. And Ford, which is an American manufacturing company for vehicles, they actually have plants in other parts of the world as well. So when the definition says produced within a country's borders, it is referring to anything that is built within the U.S. So even though Toyota is a Japanese company, if they have plants in Ohio to produce their vehicles, those final cars, those Toyota vehicles they're producing, are part of GDP. Versus Ford, if they have plants down in Brazil, those cars being imported into the U.S. are not considered part of GDP. So it produced within a country's borders. It has to be within the borders. And then it has to be within a given year. So no resold items. So if you were to go buy a lawnmower today that's brand new from Home Depot, that would be considered part of the GDP for this year. If you go on Craigslist and buy a vehicle that's from 2012, that would not be considered part of GDP. It has to be sold in a given year, within that year. So anything that's purchased brand new during this year is considered part of GDP. Now, there are two approaches that are used to calculate GDP. One is called the expenditure approach, which is the amount spent. So let me walk you through this. What we mean by this is that we are going to look at four different categories: consumer goods and services, business goods and services, government goods and services, and then net exports. So these are the big four categories when it comes to the expenditure approach. So anything that is spent throughout this year is considered part of that expenditure approach. So here's an example. Let's say that we have a country and the only goods and services that are sold are cars and trucks. Nothing else. Let's just theoretically stick with me here. We sold 10 cars this year at $15,000 each, totaling $150,000. And we only sold 10 trucks in this year at $20K each, times 10 trucks, we'd be at $200K. Our GDP for this year would be $350,000. This is the expenditure approach. So all the money spent on these vehicles would be the total amount. So what any economy does is they look at 4 categories: consumer goods and services, businesses, goods and services, governments, and then net exports. And let me explain the net export. What this is referring to is that exports are items that are leaving the U.S. So Ford is, let's say they have plants within the U.S. and they're sending their trucks to Canada. That is an export. It is leaving, exiting out of the U.S. versus imports are products that are coming in. So a lot of consumer goods and services that are in the U.S. are made in China, so they are considered imports. So net exports is referring to we take the total amount of exports minus the imports, and then what's left is considered part of that expenditure approach. A good way to remember this is C plus I plus G plus XN. Consumer goods, business goods, governments, and then net exports. The other approach we can use is income approach. This is where everyone that is getting paid. So for instance, if we take all the income from people building a brand new house, you have your contractor, you have your plumber, you have your electrician, you have your carpenter, you have your landscaping crew, you have all these different individuals that are building and contributing to building a house. We would take all the income that people earn throughout a year, be able to add that together, be able to get a GDP number. Now, we have something called nominal versus real GDP. Now, let me sidestep for a minute here just to clarify GDP again. GDP is that number of all value of what that country is worth. So if you were to put a price tag on the United States, that would be the amount that we would sell the country and everyone for. Obviously, you don't do that, but that is the best way to look at a number like this. Now, there's something called nominal versus real GDP. Nominal is measured in current prices, and real GDP, is expressed in constant or in changing prices. So, what I mean by that, let's look at 3 different years. Let's say, let's see if it'll let me do this here, that this is year 1. This is year 2 and year 3. Okay? So, let's say in year 1, and let's go back to our model that we're just selling trucks and cars. That's it, nothing else. And we're trying to calculate GDP. We sold 10 trucks and 10 cars at $20,000, $50,000. Total GDP for that year would be $350,000. The next year, we saw an increase in price of trucks now going for $25K and cars going for $20K. So the total GDP for that year would be $450,000. And then year 3, the price increased again. They're going for $30K for trucks and $25K for cars. And we have these 3 different numbers. If we look at these 3 different numbers, we would say, oh, GDP is growing. We have growth. 350,000, we made it to 450, so we had 100,000 there, and then the year after, 550. In reality, we didn't have any growth. Nominal is measuring in current prices. So that's what you see here is these 350, 450, 550, and nominal prices. Real GDP, though, actually measures growth and not so much the dollar amount. So what you do with real GDP is you create a base year. So let's say that we take year 1 as the base year of total amount of purchases, selling of cars and trucks. Well, we would look at that and say, okay, we only sold 10 and 10, cars and trucks 10 and 10. Next year only 10 and 10, year 3 only 10 and 10. Well, that results that we did not have any growth. We had something called inflation, which we'll get to later. So nominal GDP is only measured in the current prices of that year. Real GDP takes a base year into effect and then measures it based on the quantities that are measured and not so much the dollar amount that we see that is increasing. Now, limitations to GDP. Non-market activities are included into this. Doing or making on their own. So if someone does, if you go mow the neighbor's lawn and they just give you $20, that's not included in GDP. There's no way to track that. Or if you babysit, or if you're a nanny, those are non-market activities. The underground economy. If you are selling things and purchasing cash, there's no way to calculate that. The drug cartels that are pouring into the U.S., that's not part of GDP. We don't want that part of GDP, but that's part of the black market. Negative externalities, pollution. Just because a GDP number is extremely high for a country doesn't mean necessarily that the externalities of it is going well. Maybe it's pollution. So for instance, in China, the pollution is extremely high. Their economy is strong, but their pollution is just as strong as well. But that's a negative externality. And then what about the quality of life? Is there happiness? You could have a huge GDP number, but what if you're working 7 days a week constantly? Something to think about. Now, there's some other tools as well that we use to measure the economy. One of those is called GNP. This is where we go through and cipher U.S. companies versus foreign firms. So that Japanese company Toyota that had firms in Ohio, we would subtract them from the number, and then that Ford company in Brazil, we would add those numbers. So it does a great job of figuring out what U.S. is actually worth in GNP. And then we have something called NNP, and this is where we think of depreciation from each year. When you buy a brand new vehicle, it depreciates in value automatically, meaning that if you bought it for $40,000, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it's only worth $35,000. As a result of that, that's a depreciation towards this. So NNP is designed to calculate depreciation. And then we have other tools, the national income. What it does, it looks at discrepancies. It looks at GDP and GNP and sees where are we missing things, where's the discrepancies. And then we have something called personal income. This is where we take the NI, national income, minus taxes, reinvested profit, Social Security, and we get something called PI. And then we have something called DPI. DPI is the whole idea of what are people actually bringing home in their paycheck. So if you're getting paid $10 an hour, at 10 hours a week, you get $100. Well, that's not the actual amount you get. You'll probably get something in the $90 to $80 range. Well, DPI is designed to calculate that. And this is a great tool as well. Just because people are making more money per hour, that doesn't mean necessarily growth is taking place, because what if you have an increase in Social Security and Medicare and other things? So DPI does a great job, a great tool of just giving an idea of what is individual income taxes minus personal income. We have something called influence on GDP when it comes to price level and aggregate. So for this one, this kind of looks familiar. We looked at demand curve, we've looked at supply curve in the past. Well, we can do the same thing on a macro level, but we call it price level and we call it GDP. Those are two measurements. So instead of having quantity and price, we have price level and GDP. And we use a term called aggregate. And aggregate is aggregate means total amount. On my next video, we're going to discuss different factors that move the aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So this is the end of section 1 of chapter 12.